Hello, and welcome to the South Coast Artist Index, where artists, performers, and writers, as well as curators, directors, and supporters, anyone with ties to the creative community, drops by to introduce themselves to you. We'll talk about their beginnings, their vision, their passion, and so much more. The South Coast Artist Index podcast is brought to you in part by Heavenly Spirits, who invites you to celebrate the art of life and creative communities everywhere.
Hi, this is Ron Fortier with another episode of the In Focus podcast brought to you by the Artists Index. And we're about ready to get rolling on, my goodness, I think we're up there, almost 200 podcasts. This artist I've been wanting to get for a long time, first of all, because I'm going to keep it a mystery. They are a sculptor. That sounds stupid, but anyway, they are a sculptor. The other reason is because of their work, they have achieved, let's put it this way, international notoriety. I'll let you describe the type of notoriety. And wow, it's kind of like drop jaw. And I want to say that the notoriety, the DNA of that is probably going all the way back to the people who used to hang witches, but I'll leave it at that. And with that in mind, guest, would you mind introducing yourself, telling us your name, obviously, and spelling your name for us?
Yes, good evening. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast. My name is Donna Dodson, and it's DonnaDodson.
Not D-O. How did they used to spell Dotson? D-A-T-S-U-N?
T-S-U-N. Yeah, you're old enough to remember that.
Yeah. I used to own a honeybee.
Oh, okay. Classic.
Yeah.
We are driven.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, mad.
Yeah.
So I've been waiting for a long time, as I said, in the roll in to get you on this. And then, wow, you had a moment of deja vu all over again with pasties. And I'm not talking about the Welch treat. Could you explain to us, give us the long and possibly sordid history of all the kerfuffle that has surrounded you?
Sure. Yeah, it's very surreal, I have to admit. So, I primarily am a wood sculptor, which it's not what I'm known for, but it's primarily what I do. And, about 10 years ago, I made a small sculpture. I was thinking about the fairy tales that we grew up with, like Little Red Riding Hood or Little Match Girl or Cinderella. And I made these kind of bird-headed goddess figures that were interpreting them, but in a more contemporary sense. And so I made a tiny one about a foot tall, and it was called Seagull Cinderella, because what kind of bird would Cinderella be? Well, she would be a seagull, the common bird. And so, maybe a few years after that, 5 years after that, I started to do more public art. I thought about getting my work out of galleries and museums into the public sphere. And so I decided I would kind of just translate, what I was doing in wood just to a larger scale, obviously using outdoor materials like styrofoam, stucco, and stuff that can be outside, whereas wood is not a great material for that. And so I applied for different projects. One was in Brooklyn, so on the waterfront. And I thought, I'm going to make Seagull Cinderella, but huge. I'm going to make her, 9 feet tall and 4 feet around. And so, in the translation, she changed a little, but basically it was this kind of soft pink wings and yellow beak. It was very similar to the wood. And I learned a big lesson, because styrofoam and cement don't have any character or voice. Wood has a voice. It has a grain. It has a story. It has time, has sensuality. And but I realized that I really needed to learn a lot more about color and painting if I was going to continue doing public art. So I got the sculpture back, and I got another invitation to loan it. So I loaned it to Provincetown on the water. And so the gallery I was with at the time, she was really encouraged artists, to always be growing. And she was like, I can just picture this with like a bikini, for 4th of July, red, white, and blue. And I was like, I don't know about the red, white, and blue, but I could see like daisies. And so I added some daisies and I amped up the colors. They became really neon colors and got away from this pale stuff. It's like bold colors, this crazy. And so I made like a daisy chain around her waist, and I got the sculpture back. And I had another opportunity to show it on the banks of Lake Michigan, water. Again, it's a seabird. And so I thought, Cinderella would have a full length skirt of daisy. She wouldn't just have like 3 daisies around her waist. So I gave her like the full skirt, neon, went to Michigan. And in the meantime, I moved from Boston to Maynard, which is a mill town, basically, a lot of rivers. And so when I moved here, the sculpture was in Michigan. And then, I lived here for a few months, the sculpture came back. And so I put it in my front yard. And, it's huge and I didn't have anywhere to store it. And so kind of became a local landmark. And then again, I entered it for another competition, Seaport Art Walk in New Bedford. And, again, on the water. And so when I loaned it, this is how many loans we're talking, right? It's been a number of places at this point. Some young, maybe we could say grumpy guy in New Bedford, supposedly drove by with his kids, and his kids said, "Look, Dad, it's a duck with boobs." And he got really offended that my sculpture was making his children think about boobs. And then he started a petition to take it down. And of course, the mayor's office in New Bedford put it up. And of course, it was also a temporary project. So a number of ironies, the city stood behind me. But the press, really the artists, I would say first the artists really kind of came out and were like, wait a minute, we don't really want the sculpture taken down. We reached out to the gentleman and said, can we have a conversation? This would be super interesting. And again, grumpy guy says, unless you're going to take it down, there's nothing to talk about. And so no conversation. And so the artists started counter petitions to make, the rear end bigger, to, take all the breasts off all the sculptures in art history because one gentleman was offended. And, so it just kind of, it was, and then the press would get a hold of it and say, the boob hating guy wants the sculpture gone. And he found out I was from Boston, not New Bedford. The Boston hating guy, wants the sculpture gone. And so the press was like a game of telephone. Like with each telling, it was a little bit more wrong. And so it just kind of kept going and going and going. And so that was 7 years ago. So Maynard in the meantime said, hey, New Bedford, if you can't handle that sculpture, just send her back. And so we kind of used all the media to kind of turn the tables, and partly because the artists, again, it really came down to the artists in New Bedford, felt like we love this sculpture. Like we could have a conversation about who likes it and who doesn't like it, but many people in the community love it. And so why would we take it away from them? And so artists made stickers. It kind of became a meme, and it became stickers. And then it became a fundraiser for a center that helps women who are experiencing breast cancer. Because again, the guy kept attacking like the boobs. And then Maynard got into it, was like, hey, send it back. And so when it got time to leave, just at the end of the thing, Maynard had a parade. There's like a town proclamation for Seagull Cinderella. We had a fundraiser for another sort of, breast cancer awareness organization. And so she came home, and, there were other things, but anyways, and then, this is like 7 years later, I get another call saying, can we have her back? It's the 10th anniversary of the Seaport Art Walk. And I thought, I would love to say yes to you, but I don't know if I'm like
ready
up for this. And I thought, well, I love New Bedford, and I love Jesper Goli, and they
maybe the angry Boston boob guy moved away. Or his children are definitely 10 years older. They're adults probably, right?
Yeah, exactly. They've seen other boobs besides Seagull Cinderella's at this point, even though she was their first, I guess. So I thought, okay. And then I thought, I always did picture it with a bikini. on the top, like a daisy bikini. And I thought, I'm going for it. She's getting a bikini. She's getting, the full Monty, and so yeah, the press picked it up again, and here we are. It's back in the news. I think this year it's gone to Kenya and Pakistan. Last time it went overseas as well, but different countries. But yeah.
I haven't seen it on Espresso, the Portuguese newspaper, which I keep. That's how I keep in touch, because I lived there for about a year. But I'm still like absolutely drop jaw flabbergasted. And I was waiting. You told me Brooklyn, then you told me Maynard, then you told me on the shores of Lake Michigan, and then I think we went back to Maynard again, and then and maybe a couple of places in between, and then I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, and it's like, I didn't want to break your stride and say, well, pardon my French, any bitching about it in those other places, right?
No, and it was it was even on the grounds of like a private school, in New England, Milton Academy,
Oh my God, it's a state institution.
You think? Yeah. So, it's, I think there might have been a little more behind the scenes type thing. Maybe there was a little, it's like, well, it's temporary, it's going to be here. And then, so
I was just amazed. I mean, I'm wondering, I remember during the pandemic, there was somebody who said, we're all keeping our eye on COVID, but there is another pandemic that's has descended upon the populace, and that is one that has to do with mental or emotional health. And not to be political, but they basically said, and it seems to be very well ensconced in the red party. Let's use that color instead of the three letters. And these individuals seem to be mesmerized by M&Ms wearing shoes and Barbie movies and a couple of other bizarre things. And did this gentleman's profile match with the profile of those other people who just went crazy over it's not real?
Good question. I don't know. It was, what was sad for me was that the gentleman's wife is an artist and also an educator, and I thought, and he was young. I just thought, how can you be so grumpy, so young,
Right.
Like as you get older, you have a lot of losses, you have physical limitations,
Right.
Like there's a lot of reason to be grumpy, let's say, as you get older.
Now, there was another
But
boob backlash up towards Plymouth. And to use the now politically incorrect term, it was a sculpture, a bronze of an Indian maiden. Do you remember that? Because I don't remember the details of that, but there was a big kerfuffle about that.
Interesting. I don't recall that in Plymouth.
I believe it was in Plymouth. I should have looked it up, but it just popped into my head. Now let's go back to your work in general, because one of the things I when I saw your work for the first time, I at the Colo Colo Gallery at the Kilburn Mill in New Bedford, Massachusetts. The first word that popped in my head was totemic. So they almost look like remnants or artifacts of a lost culture. But your focus is specifically on gender.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm interested in making the sculptures like I want to see, I would say, I want to see sculptures of, our lost matriarchs, right? The ancient civilization where women were the rulers, that's where the sculptures come from, and I'm very interested in that. Of course, it's a product of my imagination, and wishful thinking, but I need these sculptures in my life. Like I need to see something I can believe in. And I think that's where these are coming from.
Well, I mean, once upon a time I taught art history, and I'm rusty now. It's been years, because it's like anything else. If you don't keep your hand in it, you go a little stale. But I do remember trying to explain to students, because I did try to teach art history in a very, very different manner, especially to non-art majors, because I wanted them to have concepts that they could apply, not to just remember artist, medium, date, it's school, and one of the things I remember telling them, from the Paleolithic age, 10,000 years ago, the belief system of this other sphere, this other power, this energy, was earth-based, mother-based, and it was all based on the menstrual cycle and the moon. I mean, they noticed, this is kind of weird. Full moon, and then somewhere along the line, it went from Mother Earth to Father Sky. And that's when things started to get really ugly. And the blood didn't come from a natural cycle. It came from slaying other people or blood sacrifice. And it wasn't until I think the 12th century, even in Christianity, where Mary, the Mother of God, was a secondary, tertiary figure. It wasn't until the cult of Mary was developed. It was almost, in fact, and I could be wrong, again, I'm doing all this from memory. I'm not trying to impress anybody other than myself. This whole Mother Earth thing, this connectivity of women, this is the Mother of God, and she just got like shoved into a corner. And there always seems to be this push and pull with gender. My mother she's going to be 97. I mention her almost every program here.
Wow.
But she was, I didn't even know what the word feminista was until it showed up. But when I first heard that word, I was like, oh my God, that's my mother. Because she was against misogyny. She was against, all of these things. And, I found out later that her father was a socialist. So that's why she grew up very, very different. She was very open-minded, those damn socialists, right? So especially with gender becoming a larger topic by the day, how has that affected your artwork?
I think it's made it more relevant. My art teacher used to say, like, just wait till the world catches up with you.
Well,
and then they'll see it your way.
Yeah. Well, Man Ray said, you can't be after your time or before your time. You can only be of your time.
Right. I think that it's not. I think it's seen in a different light now. For many reasons. I mean, you mentioned the pandemic. There's been, Me Too. We've had 100 years of suffrage. Wonder Woman turned 80. We had the first woman vice president. I think that there's strides and there's some normalizing of just, women's humanity, right? And so, and girls, much more focus and a lot of kind of excavating these real heroines, that we have known in history, but have been buried or forgotten, right? So it's a different time than, even when I grew up, 50 years ago, we're in a different time.
Oh yeah. 50 years ago, if you were married back then, you would have to ask your husband's permission to get a credit card. And
right?
Gen X is like, will look at you like, what?
Right.
What? You grew up with the dinosaurs? What
right.
is that?
Yeah.
So we have this great situation where you have this sculpture, the Seagull Cinderella. It has an interesting background. I'm going to get to why the morphing of birds with gender, female gender, and then non-occurrences, at several locations, from pretty much from the Mississippi east, right? And then right in our own backyard here. Oops. But you've had to have, you obviously had some sleepless nights, and you also had some rewards from this. And I'm trying to choose my words very carefully. From the, let's use that old term, from the kerfuffle, okay? But it's still, now, do you have like shell shock? When you go do a piece, do you have that voice in your head going, oh God, don't, no, oh, this could be a mess, all right? Or is it, yeah, it could be a mess, I'm going for it,
Oh, I think the first time around, it was much harder because in a way, when it's, you think like, oh my God, people hate my work, but not just people hate my work, but like people hate my work and they're starting this petition and they've gone really public with how much they hate my work. And so any artist, I think, would think, oh my God, my work sucks. It's like your worst fear. And now you're confronting this sort of like evil avatar, but it's not an evil avatar in your head that keeps you up at night telling you that like you're terrible and your art's terrible. It's like a real person and other people, and so that was hard. And also it feels like something to be ashamed of, like maybe if I just don't talk about it, like it won't go away, right?
Oh,
and
yeah,
I don't have to engage with it or like admit that it's happening. Maybe it'll just go away and I'll be fine, so it was really embracing, I think, some of like, at least as an artist, my own worst fears and kind of nightmares. So
yeah,
but I think there was some growing in that of like, hey, public art's a very democratic sport. We're not talking about people who came into an art gallery, we're talking about like a gut reaction, and what is the gut reaction? My husband would say it's because it's bigger than most men. And that's like, it does tend to be along gender lines. I have to admit that a lot of women just go, whatever, it's got boobs, so do I. And I think for some, not always men, but my husband's theory is that it's larger than most men, and that stirs up something in them that they can't,
some primal kind of thing,
put their finger on, even though she's very, she's like a grandmother. She's not
like a Matrushka doll. In fact, you should make Matrushka, Matrushka, Seagull Cinderellas.
Totally. I mean, it's whimsical. I mean, it's
whimsical, yeah. And then after a while, you get sick of hearing that whimsy word. But anyway,
well, again, it's like a word that people say that you're not supposed to embrace as an artist. Like, no, you're supposed to take my art seriously. Like, you're not supposed to tell me it's funny or whimsical. Like, I'm supposed to be, really offended. And again, it's like it's again, I think art. Almost every culture in the world, I would say, gets art. Like, it's just part of life. It's part of food. It's part of clothing. It's part of public spaces. It's part of design. Like, art is just woven. And I think in the United States, I think we have a much more difficult relationship with art, and a more like, what is it and who's it for? And it just like not a intrinsic relationship with art. We feel like we have to be told what art is, because art is a capital A, and then there's craft over here and there's design over here, like, and it's, or like cultures have art, but, and just all this kind of schizophrenia around art. But what is the American culture? And, so I feel like we have this very kind of like fraught relationship with art, and it certainly comes out, in public art. Again, you're, I mean, you can't do a lot of public art without a thick skin, because sometimes it stirs up a conversation because you've put something in the public square for people to talk about,
Right.
and it's great. I mean,
I had somebody
Yes.
tell me it's like going on the steps of City Hall and pulling down your pants. Either one or two things are going to happen. People are going to applaud or they're going to laugh.
There you go.
You know, it's a 50-50 kind of a thing. And now, have you traveled abroad or gone to other countries?
I have, yeah.
Now, what, you know, I'll have you give me some example. When people, you would meet people and they would say, well, what do you do? And you would tell them, and what would happen?
I mean, art, usually they're like, wow, like an artist is usually like held in a certain amount of esteem, like, oh, you're an artist. Like usually there's a respect. And in our culture, it's like, oh, that's too bad. You're probably poor, and like,
yeah, you make any
your
money
family probably has to support you. Like, oh, that's too bad.
Yeah, daddy rich. Yeah, or your husband rich. Yeah. It is a bizarre. I've offended some people by saying that American culture, the term American culture, is an oxymoron. We ain't got no culture.
We have so many cultures, many cultures.
We have many cultures all woven into one, but those who swing the cat around the room seem to. It's very, very weird. I mean, you have those people who collect art that are collecting art more as a financial investment or as a power trip than it's just weird. It's weird. Yet I would say maybe the last 15 years, and maybe it could be because of social media and we're more aware of other people. Like, I don't know if you've ever bumped into anybody on Instagram or whatever that is doing work parallel to yours or similar to yours. And you're like, what? And how's that possible? Right? It's kind of blinking, enlightening kind of thing. But there are more artists than there have ever been, or at least those who admit they are, or they've been registered somehow, somewhere, whatever. And there are also more museums than there ever have been. So all this art is going someplace. Well, not all of it. I mean, some of us, you have your days where you weeks or months or whatever, where you're selling a couple of pieces and you're like, yeah, and then you're riding on that cash flow until, oh, we're gonna sell another piece, right? But the thing that brought you into the conversation last night with James Dozier and the DFABC, the Detroit Fine Arts Breakfast Club Afterglow, which is where artists just show up. And in fact, and I'll give you the link for next week. It's just like this, but sometimes it's like 20 people, sometimes it's only 4 people. That people go in and out and so on and so forth. And they were talking about the Martin Luther King, the brand new sculpture, the one he's at a lectern. And again, the passions that have come out have been, love it, blah, blah, blah. My wife was there when he made that speech. That was the precursor to the I Have a Dream speech.
Wow.
And there are other people like, doesn't look like him at all. So I was like, well, I said, it's, and I brought up Frederick Douglass, and I said, okay. And I showed them the Frederick Douglass sculpture that was just installed in New Bedford, which is a really, really nice piece. And I said, you have a personage, celebrity, historical figure, whatever. We have this image in our heads, like Lincoln, for example. You say Lincoln, and everybody will have an image that's burned into their brain. And if you could somehow extract that image and put it on a table with everybody else, I bet you a high percentage would have the exact same image of Lincoln. There would only be a couple of people who would have a totally different image of Lincoln. It would still be Lincoln. It would still be him at some point in his life, but it wouldn't be the iconic Lincoln, right? And I said, so to say it doesn't look like him, does it not look like him at all because he looks like Dr. Doolittle? Eddie Murphy is Dr. Doolittle. I mean, what is it about him that does not look like him? So the idea of now, you've got people have this iconic image of a certain person in their mind. So of course, you have loved ones in the family, and there's a new photograph taken, or you find an old photograph. Oh, that doesn't look like Ma. But what is her? because she's standing, it's I never knew she looked like that, but it's still the same person. But people don't want to accept that it doesn't match the idea of that person in their head, right? So then, of course, I swung over to the Embrace in Boston, which Blake, boy, he took a beating on that. But now I heard it's starting to change because people are finally going, oh, it was a really brave move to do what he did, because it was just focused on the embrace. I mean, if you when you embrace your husband, you have one of those moments where you're like, okay, I could go right now and I'd be okay. It's that loving, that warm, and so on and so forth, right? So then we brought you in, and they're like, what? And I showed them the Seagull Cinderella, and they were offended by that. Why? Because it has boobs.
Yeah. As soon as you try and explain it, it just kind of keeps getting more and more weird. It was like, well, what does a seagull have to do with New Bedford anyways? And then it was like, everyone knows seagulls don't have boobs, and he just kept going. Those were all his arguments of like,
Oh my God, this guy's got to be the most literal person.
Well, when you were talking about what's the measure of a good sculpture, you talked about likeness. Does it look like who it's supposed to? Well, what do you do when it's something that's just like a product of your imagination? You can't measure it by anything, really. You can't say, well, it doesn't really look like a seagull.
So this gentleman would be offended if he went to the ancient section of any museum in the world, because they're naked. They're all naked, right?
We're all born naked.
and then the other thing that's really kind of a mind blower is, your seagull is painted. The technical term, it's polychrome, meaning poly, many, chrome, color. And to imagine some of these Greek, from the golden age of Athens, that it looks like a bad Greek gift shop because they're all painted. They've got, the hair, whether it's the curlies or the hair on the head or whatever, and the eyelashes and the eyebrows. And here are the people who supposedly set the high bar for aesthetics. I'm thinking to myself, I don't know, this is sort of creepy.
Yeah, I liked it better monochrome.
Yeah, white was fine. Yeah,
Yeah, just looking at the form. Yeah.
Exactly. And then, another sculpture that came into the news again was the David.
Oh, yeah. Oh, right. Yeah, that would offended someone. It's like, do you realize that children have bodies, naked bodies? Let's just go out on a limb here. Like, how do you help children have an understanding of their own
and feel comfortable with themselves
if you're demonizing someone else's body that looks just like theirs? I mean, it doesn't make any sense.
Now with the emphasis on, or the revelation of this other segment of society that, people my age, our age, when we heard the word trans, it was a short for another short abbreviation, tranny, for transvestite. So now when you say somebody's trans, it's like, how could you be a 5-year-old and be a trans? Then it's like, oh, no, this child is, this is a more proper term. It's either neither one nor the other, sometimes both. And people are like sort of stunned and shocked. And it's like, well, this has been going on for a long, long time. And yet, for some reason, it's been not even whispered. It's been so horrible, perceived as horrible, that it's just been kept quiet. And there are people who have suffered throughout their lives, even historic figures, some that are just coming to light now. And then there's that whole, the misuse of the term, but the new definition of woke. goes beyond a Black mother telling her children that they really have to pay attention, situational analysis, situational awareness. They have to really pay attention to what's going on because it's not easy being out there and being a person of color. But now it's been taken to be people that are aware of things. They don't deny things, that they accept things. And I wonder what causes these clashes of perception.
Good question. I mean, I think a lot of things have been, very polarized, and certainly politicized, that things we used to kind of have, for example, facts that we all agree on.
Yeah.
I blame it on the fact that we have a two-party system. I think if we had, ranked choice, we could help out our country a lot, at least because if you're involved in any kind of local politics, you have no idea what party anybody is affiliated with, because each issue is just the issue, and someone may agree with you on this one and disagree with you on that one. It has nothing to do with whatever your, affiliations are. You're talking about, drilling into the granular level or large conceptual issues. You're not kind of stuck in this binary. Like, if you like it, I hate it, and I feel like that's just ruined everything, that you can't, and at least on national politics, it's so polarized. It's impossible to, move forwards or find common ground or work together or agree on things, undisputed facts, right? Like, it's gone. Like, there is no agreeing on undisputed facts. Like, your facts are yours, my facts are mine. Like, I just find that a zero-sum game. I find it very frustrating because in local politics, it just doesn't play a role because they don't control local elections. They're controlled differently. So I mean, that's one level. I mean, we're also seeing, kind of a backlash, I think, after years of social progress and, rights for women, rights for people of color, Black Lives Matter, rights for gay and lesbian and queer people. I think we're really seeing huge backlash, enormous backlash right now in the Supreme Court, all the way down now to the state legislatures, and, again, it just doesn't bode well for people who are vulnerable. It doesn't bode well for kind of this, division, this constant division of communities and, states and, even neighbors, on a certain level, it just doesn't seem to bode well, and certainly, for those of us who were really happy with all the social progress, it's kind of disturbing, like what we're looking at now, for women's lives, for people of color, for gay and lesbian and queer, families and friends. I think it's concerning.
Yeah, it's still a transition. I was speaking with Marina Wells, who's the photography fellow at the Whaling Museum, and she asked me if I had gone to the MFA to see the I believe, is it Isabel Wilkinson, because Isabel Wilkerson is the author of The Warmth of Other Suns. So it's Isabel Wilkinson, I believe, and her fame was popped out of a box basically when they found that trunk in an attic of a home up in P-Town of all these prints, and then they discovered that, oh my gosh, she may have been the originator of the white line block print. But P-Town, for some people, you say P-Town, they giggle. But she was a lesbian and the woman she lived with was a lesbian. But back in those days, I don't know if you remember as a kid, there were what they referred to as spinster sisters or spinsters, or with men, especially older ones, because you would very rarely see the younger couples. The older ones, they would be called weird uncles, or just old uncles, or spinster brothers, or whatever. When in reality they were out not out kind of thing, But here's this incredible body of work, and the MFA supposedly is still tiptoeing around that issue of sexuality, and yet when they were the only one out of 4 museums in the country who accepted the Philip Guston collection for exhibition, which was a phenomenal exhibit. So I guess James Baldwin was right. All art is protest, or something.
Right. You think of someone who had the courage to love freely in their lives, whatever time they lived in.
Mhm.
Is it also that spirit with which they were able to make groundbreaking artwork, that they were not governed by the social mores or etc. They had something driving them, driving their ambition, driving their artwork, driving their sense of justice, that they live by their own rules to a certain extent, and I think that's incredibly admirable. I mean, I think it's what drives most artists. I think you have something inside of you that that you can't say in words, that you have to make this thing somehow that means something, and it looks like something, but you have to make it. I mean, for me, I started making art. I always said it was like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, where the guy just like pulls in all this stuff.
Oh yeah, gets his mashed potatoes. Yeah.
That was me. I mean, when I started making work, I made it out of found objects before I learned how to carve, and I would just pick up all this stuff off the street, and I would make these faces and these figures, and with brake drums, and the mechanism on a closing, screen door closer and hinges, and I would just, and it just, it just overtook me. It came from somewhere, who knows where. And, I had to do it, I couldn't stop doing it. And I still can't, and so, yeah, I mean, how do you explain that? I think some things like just defy explanation. They just are. They're a mystery. Like if you think of like medicine, like doctors don't like to admit what they don't know,
Oh yeah.
And they don't like to admit that they don't know things, that something is amiss. We can't explain why it's happening. We can't explain why you got better. We can't explain why you're not getting better. Right. Like, and so, but I think it's like that. Like there is, people of faith would say faith, it's faith. I can explain it by saying it's faith. The thing I can't explain.
Right, exactly.
But I know that there's things I can't explain. I call that faith, right? And for me, that's where my art comes from.
Yeah, the faith of things seen and unseen.
Right.
St. Francis.
And it makes visible the things unseen.
Yes. Yes.
Like I love that quote.
But it's also the same exact silly reason like why you can't find your keys, because you are insistent that you left them in a certain place, and when you find them, it is nowhere even near where you thought you had left them. But you are operating on faith that you would find them in a place that they never were.
Right.
And then it's funny. I was watching a documentary, art documentary, and this intrigues the hell out of me, because the first tier abstract expressionists were muy macho. I mean, okay, these guys were really, de Kooning, Motherwell. I mean, all those guys were really macho guys. Okay.
But that was the time.
Along comes the pop artists, and they're all gay. And I'm thinking, okay, it's not just a period of time or transition, because, we were led to believe in art history that art sort of like one art replaced the other, which replaced the other. I mean, it's all connected. And unfortunately, history is always taught in a straight line, which it isn't. I always thought it was like the Vitruvian wave, which they call it the running Greek key in architecture, where it looks like a wave. It comes into itself and it comes back out and it continues on. And I really believe that's how history is. I mean, it folds into itself, then it unravels, and then it continues on to another phase, right? But it hit me. I mean, it's only like about 10, 15 years of time. What was the difference? And I probably get in trouble for this, but I remember as a painter in the BFA, undergrad school, and I noticed the women who painted, and women because there were women in the class, and the women who were abstract artists, there was a personality thing or tells. The women who liked red wine versus white wine, or who liked whiskeys, seemed to be, in my estimation, and a young 20-something-year-old male learning how to paint along with them, that they were the far better painters, even better than the men in the room. And I could not quite figure out, there's got to be a connection to that. There's absolutely got to be some sort of weirdo connection that, and I'm just mesmerized by those silly things. So anyway, wrapping it up, because we're getting toward the end here, but all these things that we spoke about, all these experiences that you've had, you're getting older. I'm getting older. You get to that point in your art where you go, have I been playing it safe? Have I not been pushing the envelope enough? Okay, so I aggravated somebody with boobs on a bird. What can I do to really piss somebody off by creating work that stops people in their tracks, that points out the inequities of our society? Have you gotten to that point yet?
I did make a sculpture. I made a bird-headed sculpture with breasts that was a cardinal. I was trying to imagine if women could become like cardinal in the Catholic Church. So
well, there may have been. I mean, we wouldn't have Lutheranism if it wasn't for the really bad Vatican, but that's another story. Right?
Yeah, I mean, I made the next thing that's going to happen for me is I'm having a show. I made a chess set, but all the figures are female, because historically it's the king and the horsemen, the infantry, all the soldiers.
Right.
And so, the queen came on the chessboard like in the 12th or 13th century, but she didn't really get her power until they changed the rules in about the 16th century. And some people think it's because it's at the same time that there were these like powerful queens in Europe. So it was like, it was in the air, that women could be, just as capable of manipulating, nation states and stuff, through whatever means, by any means necessary. And so I made this chess set of all the figures are female, and it's actually going to the World Chess Hall of Fame, which is in St. Louis, Missouri, which is really cool because chess is like kind of an American thing, but it's way more of an Asian thing, or Southeast Asian, or, Eastern Europe. It's not really like an American as apple pie, and football and baseball. So, so it's going there, and they've never given a woman a solo show. And it's like the 100th anniversary of the whole like World Chess Federation. And so we'll see if I get in trouble.
Well, as you're speaking, we were talking about the lack of public art, like in Detroit, for example. New Bedford could always use more. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I can imagine what this set looks like, because I know your work looks like. And I'm thinking to myself, it'd be really, really cool to have these life size as well, where not like in some of those places where you're allowed to pick up the thing and play this game with these massive chess pieces, but to be able to still have that kind of concept where it's not static. where you would have to have some sort of a lottery system and pit two players against each other. And then they would have these handlers, I guess you'd want to call it, and it would only be one move per player per day. So 2 moves a day, where they would, manipulate these chess pieces. I mean, people are mesmerized by looking at a bald eagle nest on live feed or the pandas. I mean, chess is not a fast game.
No, it's not. And actually my chess set, it's somewhat life-size because the sculptures sit on
it is that big.
bases.
Okay.
Yeah. So the pieces are like 5 to 6 feet tall.
Oh, wow. I thought it was like, chess size chess. Yeah.
No, it's played on a 16-foot by 16-foot board.
That is so
and
cool.
So, and you can push the pieces around. They have gliders, and I set up the whole board. Each square is 2 feet by 2 feet. So I had it in Boston about 5 years ago, the chess set, and we had matches, which were really fun. Because you don't have a bird's eye view, you're in it, you're immersed in it. And so like a lot of people would play in teams and, whatnot, some really prominent chess players came and played, which they could play it in their sleep. They don't even need to look at a board.
Right. Yeah. They should give you the letters or whatever it is,
They can think that way, but so it does present a different experience. You could put an iPad on the ceiling and put it on a screen so that you get a little bit more of that effect. So we'll see. I think how it's presented will be interesting. And then
go ahead.
In 2015 too, I made it actually was in New Bedford, Madam President. I wanted to imagine our first female president of the United States, So I'm always kind of, I guess, trying to push the envelope with my artwork,
Have you pushed it enough, you think? Well, without even trying it in one case.
I don't know. But it's like artists, they always say like, oh, your artwork's not really complete till you put it out in the world. But you have equally no control over what hits a nerve, like what, right? Like what I'll be remembered for. It won't be the thing that I think like, wow, that was the thing. That was my great, like, it isn't, I don't decide that, as
you could have
artist,
some pieces
right?
in some really cool museums, like in Cleveland or in Boston or whatever. And then there's the Seagull.
Yeah. But it's great. Like, I love that people want to talk about it. I love that it makes people laugh. I love that it stirs people up. I mean, I love all of it. I mean, this is, what art criticism is like. It's it's usually very descriptive, but but does that matter? Like, does the artwork matter to anyone? Like, how does anyone feel about the artwork? Like, to me, it's so really gratifying to have people want to talk about my artwork other than, oh, is it this formal? And is there, 3 dimensions, and this kind of like contrapod, just all this stuff, it's enormously gratifying to.
Has anybody ever approached you to do a graphic novel of this Seagull Cinderella? Because that would be like really kind of cool.
That's a great idea. Yeah, she needs to be like a children's book, right?
Yeah. I'm surprised nobody's ever approached you because wow.
Yeah.
Oh my God, it'll be banned.
Yeah. And that's good though. It helps sales.
Yeah, exactly. This has been fantastic, Don. It's been a long time coming. I'm so glad that we had a chance to speak. Do please keep in touch of any other adventures or misadventures. I hope. I mean, the time went by fast, so for me anyway. So that's got to be an indication that this is good. Any final parting words or anything? Wisdom, whatever. It's open call, so to speak.
Oh, that's a nice invitation. Let's see. I'll give you a plug for Seagull Cinderella stickers. If you live in New Bedford, TL6 Gallery has them, and all the proceeds go to help women who are experiencing breast cancer. And so
excellent. I'm going to have to buy one for my sister-in-law. She got to ring the bell, but that's always that hang time where you just never know. And there was this couple of months back, all of a sudden there were women that we, our family and friends who after remission for decades, all of a sudden, bang, it's back with a vengeance. It's like, oh my gosh.
Sorry to hear that. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah, we've had family members too dealing with it this year. It's been really hard.
Yeah. So anyway,
Yeah.
well,
okay.
hang
So
in there.
maybe she can do some good too.
Oh yeah, she for absolute sure. So once again, folks, thanks so much for listening in as we spoke with and had a great conversation with Donna Dodson, our controversial sculptress, to use another bad term, sculptress. Her sculpture of the Seagull Cinderella really caused some ripples. And you know what? If your art's not engendering some sort of passion in somebody, whether it's positive or negative, I guess you really got to go back and see what you could do better or worse. Whatever's gonna light it up. And with that in mind, thanks so much for listening. And until the next time, remember, be nice, be kind to each other out there. Bye-bye.
We'll see you next week for another episode of the South Coast Artist Index podcast. To learn more about the South Coast Artist Index, visit theartistindex.com. Find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube.